When the past dies, the future becomes a choice, love or escape. Zarya ran quickly, her breath ragged in the thin, freezing air of the desolate planet. Each footstep was heavier than the last, her legs aching with exhaustion. Yet she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her daughter's small body was curled against her chest, and the pounding of her own heart was rivaled only by the fear pounding in her mind. "Hold on, Lira," she whispered, lips trembling, as she pulled the child closer. Just a little farther. The cold winds howled around them, like the cries of ghosts. Sharp and cutting the air sliced across Zarya's exposed skin, but she pushed forward. Her boots struck the rocky ground with loud thuds that echoed across the barren, icy wasteland. Each echo reminded her they were not safe, not yet. "Are they still behind us?" Lira asked in a whisper, peeking over her mother's shoulder. "I don't know," Zarya replied, glancing back for a brief second, "but I'm not taking any chances." Eventually her strength gave out. She stumbled to a large jagged rock and collapsed beside it, leaning her back against its frozen surface. Her chest heaved as she fought to catch her breath. Lyra remained silent, clutching her mother's coat tightly, sensing the tension in every quivering muscle. "We'll be fine, darling," Zarya said softly, brushing a few strands of Lyra's tangled hair away from her face. "I promise." Lyra said nothing, but her wide eyes scanned the landscape as if expecting shadows to materialize from the storm. Zarya looked away, guilt flaring in her heart. She had promised safety too many times before, and broken every one of them, she thought. Since leaving Velathine, her homeland, Zarya had lived in constant flight, running from bounty hunters, from her past, and from the memories of a revolution that had cost her everything. Her family, her friends, even her identity had been stripped away. Now all she had left was her daughter, and her will to survive. Her thoughts drifted back to before the revolution, back to Velathine. "Do you remember the lake behind our old house?" Zarya asked quietly. Lyra blinked, confused for a moment, then nodded. "With the glowing fish," Zarya smiled. "Yes. You used to chase them with your little net, even though you never caught a single one." "I almost did it once," Lyra said, half laughing through the fatigue. Zarya chuckled weakly. "You did? Your father swore you scared all the fish away for a week." There was a moment of peace in that memory, a sliver of warmth in the freezing void they now stumbled through. But peace never lasted long. Zarya's expression hardened. She wrapped her cloak tighter around them both and rose to her feet again. "We need to keep moving," she said. "It's not safe here." Lyra whimpered but didn't protest. She knew better. They walked in silence, footsteps crunching over frozen ground. Zarya's eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of shelter or danger. She didn't know where they were headed, only that they couldn't stop. If they stopped, they'd be caught. Unbeknownst to her, across the stars aboard a long-abandoned structure, drifting silently through the void, a man named Jack Wren was living a life far different from hers. The Vanguard space station floated in quiet isolation. Once a hub of Earth Federation activity, it was now forgotten, an iron relic in the cold dark of space. Within it, Jack Wren made his home among the silence. He stood alone in a dim corridor, his boots echoing faintly as he made his morning checks. The soft hum of the station's systems was the only sound. No chatter, no orders, no war, just him. Jack paused by a rusted console and sighed. Another day, another diagnostic. Still breathing Vanguard, he muttered, running his fingers along the dusty edge of the panel. The screen flickered to life under his touch. His life here was predictable. Wake up, check the filtration system, monitor the power cores, fix anything that rattled or sparked. It was monotonous, but it was safe. That was all he had wanted since leaving Earth's military. Since that day. He moved to a small bench near the viewport and sat staring out at the stars. They blinked back, indifferently silent observers to his self-imposed exile. In his hand, he absent-mindedly rotated a small metal tag, the last thing he'd kept from his old life. "Sorry, Rick," he whispered. "You should have made it out. Not me." He gritted his teeth and pocketed the tag. He'd told himself 1,000 times that he couldn't have done anything differently. But the guilt never left. Nothing changed here. That's what he liked about it. Until today. A flicker on one of the nearby monitors caught his eye. What the hell? He rose, walking over as lines of code and interference spiked across the screen. It looked like a glitch. It should have been a glitch, but it wasn't. A faint signal buried beneath the noise repeated every few seconds. "Weak. Faint, but deliberate. Jack leaned in, his brow furrowed. This isn't from our network. He quickly tapped commands into the system tracing the source. It was coming from somewhere nearby. A ship, maybe, or a distress beacon. Curiosity warred with caution. He'd seen too much in the war to jump at ghosts, but he'd also seen too many people die because no one answered their signal. Jack exhaled slowly. His fingers hovered over the command console. All right, he muttered. Let's see what you're hiding out there. He adjusted the station's long-range scanners and began plotting a path toward the source of the signal. Back on the planet below, Zarya paused on a ridge, staring up into the swirling clouds that obscured the stars. She had no idea that help was coming, or that her life was about to change forever. Jack entered the control room of the Vanguard space station, his boots echoing in the vast empty space. The flickering overhead lights cast ghostly shadows on the metal walls, stretching long and thin like skeletal fingers. Everything about the station whispered of abandonment, of something once alive but now hollowed out. He paused in front of the main terminal and took a slow breath. Still here, he muttered, fingers brushing the dust from the edge of the console. Still alone. The control panel blinked to life under his touch, displaying a rundown of the station's life support systems, engines, and navigation. Everything checked out. Routine, boring, safe. Jack had made the space his sanctuary, his cocoon. Once a bustling hub for the Earth Federation, Vanguard had long since been abandoned, left to drift silently through space. Now only he remained a solitary mechanic, clinging to routine and silence like old friends. He moved toward the maintenance locker's tools slung over his shoulder. Each step, each task had its place. Jack checked the filtration systems, ran diagnostics, cleaned out old mechanical vents. Not because he had to, but because doing these things kept his mind from going to darker places. No voices, no orders, no goodbyes. Just quiet. But even quiet had its limits. Sometimes at night, when the station dimmed into its artificial sleep cycle, the silence grew loud. Memories crept in. Faces he couldn't forget. Screams from the battlefield. That last look in his comrade's eyes just before the blast hit. Jack tightened his jaw as he opened a service panel and began rewiring a damaged relay. Don't go there, he murmured to himself. He hadn't joined the military to be a hero, just to escape. What he found instead was death, the kind that stayed long after the blood dried. He'd left it all behind. The metals, the guilt, the weight, and found this Vanguard. A place where he could fade away unnoticed. Or so he thought. As he tightened the last bolt, a soft ping interrupted the quiet. Jack froze. It was a system alert, not part of his usual checks. He wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and walked briskly to the monitor. A signal. Faint, irregular, but unmistakably real. What now? He tapped the console, watching as a shaky waveform displayed itself on the screen. At first he thought it was background noise, space static. But as he fine-tuned the frequency, the signal sharpened. Jack's brow furrowed. This isn't from our grid. The coordinates showed it was coming from a small quadrant just outside Vanguard's usual patrol range. A drifting ship, it seemed. No ID tag, no Federation registry, and it looked damaged, possibly adrift. He scratched his chin, muttering, could be a derelict, or a trap. Jack stared at the console, the glow illuminating the lines of fatigue under his eyes. He'd seen these kinds of signals before during the war. Sometimes they led to survivors. Sometimes they led to ghosts. He hesitated. Then quietly he said, what if it's someone who needs help? The question lingered in the stale air. He tapped into the navigation system and slowly keyed in the coordinates. Vanguard's engines hummed to life, a rare occurrence after months of dormancy. As the station began its slow course toward the unknown ship, Jack leaned back in his chair. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Guess we're not done yet. Meanwhile, on the icy world below, Zarya and Lira huddled inside a shallow cave. The stone walls offered little warmth, but at least they were out of the wind. A small heat module sputtered beside them, barely functional. Zarya watched Lira as she slept, her tiny frame curled up tight, clutching a ragged piece of cloth that once belonged to her father. She reached over and brushed a smudge of dirt from her daughter's cheek. I've failed you too many times already. The storm outside howled like a creature in pain, battering the mouth of the cave with gusts of snow and ice. Every sound made Zarya tense. Every shadow flicker made her reach for the blaster hidden beneath her cloak. Lira stirred and opened her eyes. "Mama, are we safe here?" Zarya hesitated, then nodded. "For now, but the hunters I know," she said softly, cutting her off. "We won't let them take us. I won't." Lira sat up slowly. "Where will we go next? I don't know yet," Zarya admitted. "But we'll find a way. We always do." Outside, the wind continued to wail, but inside the cave, a different kind of storm was brewing, the storm of choices, of desperation, of wondering how much longer they could run. Zarya stood up, walking to the entrance of the cave, peering into the distance. She couldn't see anything through the white veil of snow, but somehow, something felt different. She didn't know that far above, a mechanic who had long given up on hope was moving toward her. Back on Vanguard, Jack stared out the viewport as stars crawled past. The ship he was heading toward was still silent, no response. But the signal remained, weak, steady, a whisper from the void. Jack tapped his fingers on the console and muttered, "Let's hope this isn't a mistake." He adjusted his course to the old engines groaning under the strain. Vanguard had never been meant for rescue missions. But maybe, just maybe this time, it wasn't too late. The signal beeped again. Jack sat forward. "Who are you?" he whispered. And somewhere beneath a sky of endless snow, Zarya held her daughter tighter. "Someone's out there," she said quietly. Lira blinked. "What do you mean I don't know?" Zarya replied. "But I can feel it." They didn't know it yet, but fate had already begun to thread their lives together. A mechanic, a fugitive, a child. 3 people, 1 signal, and everything is about to change. With a soft, mechanical hiss, the door to the alien ship cracked open. Jack Wren stepped cautiously through the narrow gap, the metal creaking under his boots. The air inside was cold dry and carried a faint, burnt metal scent. He took a moment to scan the dim corridor, flashlights sweeping over scorched walls and hanging wires. "Definitely not a good sign," he muttered. The ship looked as if it had been drifting for a long time. Some systems still hummed faintly, but most had clearly failed. Emergency lights blinked weakly, casting erratic shadows across the passage. Jack moved slowly, every sense alert. He didn't know what or who he might find inside. Just a quick check, confirm the signal source, and get out, he reminded himself under his breath. As he rounded a corner, he stopped in his tracks. There on the floor, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. A woman. She was slumped against the wall, arms curled tightly around a small child. Her hair was tangled, her face pale and streaked with dirt. The child in her arms, no more than 6 or 7, clung to her, silently, too exhausted to cry. Jack took a cautious step forward. The woman stirred. Her eyes snapped open and locked onto him. Instantly alert, she pulled the child closer and reached for something beneath her cloak. "I'm not here to hurt you," Jack said quickly, raising both hands. "Then keep your distance," the woman growled, voice hoarse. "Who are you?" "I picked up your distress signal. I'm from Vanguard Station. My name's Jack Wren. I'm just a mechanic." Zarya narrowed her eyes at him. Her grip around Lira tightened. The child whimpered softly and buried her face in her mother's side. "A mechanic?" she asked, suspicion thick in her voice. "Since when do mechanics come looking for abandoned ships?" Jack exhaled slowly. "Since they stopped pretending they don't care anymore." He took a slow step back, kneeling instead of approaching. "Look, I know how this looks. I wasn't expecting anyone alive either. But your signal..." He nodded toward the hallway behind him. It came through. Someone was reaching out. Silence lingered in the air. Zarya studied with him. Jack didn't look like a threat. His coat was torn, his face lined with fatigue, but she'd been fooled before. "You're not with them?" she finally asked. "With who?" "The bounty hunters. The ones who've been chasing us since Velathine." Jack shook his head. "No. I don't even know what Velathine is. He gestured vaguely around the ship, trying to help. Zarya looked down at Lira, who peered up at her with glassy eyes. The child's lips were dry and her hands cold. "We can't stay here," Zarya murmured. "Not for long." "You're in no condition to travel," Jack said. "Let me help you. I've got food, medicine, A warm bed back at the station. It's not much, but it's safe. Zarya's jaw tightened. Safe stopped meaning anything a long time ago. I know, Jack said more gently, but maybe it could again. Another silence. Lira turned toward her mother and whispered, I'm cold, Mama. Zarya's heart cracked. She closed her eyes for a moment, then looked up at Jack. If you're lying, I'm not. Then help me carry her. Jack moved carefully, letting Zarya lift Lira into his arms. The child barely stirred her head, resting against his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected. All right, he said, steadying his grip. Let's get out of here. As they exited the broken ship and stepped onto the docking corridor of Vanguard, Jack glanced at Zarya. You got a name, he asked. She hesitated. Zarya. Jack gave a small nod. And the kid, Lira. Pretty name, he said. Zarya said nothing, but something in her expression had softened. Back aboard Vanguard, the station groaned as if annoyed to be woken from its quiet slumber. Jack guided them through the old halls, the emergency lights glowing dully on the steel walls. Zarya kept close eyes darting to every corner. You live here alone, she asked. Yeah. For how long? Long enough to forget how to talk to people properly, Jack said with a small self-deprecating smirk. Zarya didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. They reached the habitation wing. Jack keyed open the door to his quarters, a modest space with a working heater, a couple of cots and shelves lined with spare parts and ration packs. Jack laid Lira gently on one of the cots and tossed a blanket over her. The girl sighed in her sleep. Zarya stepped inside, slowly looking around. It's not much, Jack said, rubbing the back of his neck. But the systems work. Heat, air. Food's decent if you don't mind protein bricks. She sat down on the edge of the other cot, exhaustion catching up to her. It's more than we've had in months. Jack crouched down near the heater and adjusted the setting. Warmth began to hum softly through the air. I'll leave you two alone for a while. Let you settle. Zarya watched him walk to the door. Why? She asked suddenly. Jack stopped. Why are you helping us? Her voice was low but steady. You don't know who I am. What I've done. Who's after me? He turned back, meeting her gaze. Because someone should have helped me once, he said. And they didn't. So maybe this time I can make it right. He gave a small nod, then stepped out and let the door slide shut behind him. Zarya looked down at her daughter, whose breathing had finally slowed. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope just a little. Since Zarya and Lira had agreed to follow Jack to the Vanguard station, everything began to shift slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. They left behind the wreck of the alien ship and entered a space that was cold and sterile, yet strangely comforting. The halls of Vanguard echoed with a quiet stillness that didn't feel threatening. It felt still, peaceful. Zarya kept her guard up during the first days. She stayed close to Lira and only spoke when necessary. Trust wasn't something she gave easily anymore, not after Velathine. She'd been betrayed before by those who smiled first and asked questions later. But Jack didn't smile much, and more importantly, he didn't pry. He simply gave them space. Each day, Jack worked on routine maintenance. He didn't make demands. He didn't treat them like a burden. When food was prepared, he left it out without comment. When Zarya hovered near the control panels watching him, he didn't chase her off. Instead, he handed her tools. Have you ever used a plasma torque wrench? He asked one morning, holding out the slightly worn device. Zarya hesitated, once or twice, in another life. Jack gave a small nod. Good. Hold that corner panel open while I recalibrate the pressure lines. Their work together began like that, quiet, mechanical. No small talk, just action and precision. But something began to shift. One evening, as they sat in the mess area, Lira munched slowly on a heated ration bar, while Jack ran diagnostics on the adjacent console. Zarya watched the soft glow of the heater flicker across her daughter's face. She's sleeping better, Zarya said suddenly, breaking the silence. Jack looked up. That's good. I think it's the heat, she added. And the silence. She's not waking up afraid anymore. He nodded, turning back to the panel. That's what this place is good for. Silence. You start hearing your own thoughts again. Zarya chuckled softly. Not always a good thing. Jack smiled just a little. No, I guess not. Later that night, when Lira had fallen asleep wrapped in an emergency blanket, Zarya lingered in the hallway as Jack adjusted a valve near the central reactor. You live here completely alone, she asked, her voice echoing faintly. Jack didn't turn to look at her. Yeah, it has been about 4 years since anyone else stepped foot on this station. Zarya crossed her arms. Why stay? Why not leave? He paused, considering his answer. Peace, or the illusion of it. After the war, I didn't want people. I didn't trust myself to be around them. Zarya leaned against the wall. You lost someone. It wasn't a question? Jack gave a short nod. A comrade. We were close. I made a choice that cost him his life, and I've been avoiding people ever since. Zarya looked at the floor. You're not the only one running from something. They stood there in silence, separated by only a few feet, but more connected in that moment than either realized. Over the following days, Zarya started joining Jack during his maintenance rounds. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to learn. She watched how he patched cracked power lines, repressurized coolant tanks, and restored failing gravity regulators. Why don't you write any of this down? She asked once, crouched beside him in a narrow access tube. Jack shrugged. Never needed to. Been doing this long enough that it's second nature. Well, Zarya said, handing him a tool. Maybe teach it to someone else, in case you're not here one day. He paused mid-tighten, then glanced at her. Are you volunteering? She smirked. Maybe. Their conversations remained short, but something grew between them, comfort perhaps, or a fragile camaraderie. Jack didn't push. Zarya didn't flee. They moved in quiet synchronization like two scarred instruments, slowly learning how to harmonize again. One evening, Zarya returned from scavenging an old cargo pod Jack had mentioned. She set down a cracked metal box on the workstation and tossed him a grin. You weren't kidding about useful junk. Found half a fusion coil and what I think is a working water purifier. Jack raised an eyebrow. Color me impressed. Most people would have walked past that pile. I'm not most people, she said, then added after a beat. I used to build things, before everything. He looked at her, curiosity flickering. What kind of things? Tools, tech, fixing machines, small stuff. My mother was a maker. She taught me how to create before she taught me how to fight. Jack stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. You've got good instincts. I had to learn to survive, she said, her expression darkening, and to keep her safe. She glanced toward the corner where Lira slept, curled up in a heap of blankets. Jack followed her gaze. She's strong, he said. You can see it in her eyes. Zarya's shoulders softened slightly. Yeah, but I wish she didn't have to be. A beat of silence. Then Jack said quietly, we can give her that. A chance to just be a kid again. Zarya's eyes met his. That's a heavy promise. I didn't say it would be easy, he replied. Just possible. In the following night, Zarya and Jack began sharing more memories, thoughts, and regrets. They sat by the observation window while Lira slept, the stars crawling past like slow-burning embers. Zarya pointed toward a red nebula in the distance. That one used to be a route to Velethine. It was always glowing on the horizon. We called it the Guardian's Flame. Jack leaned back. We had names for stars too. During training, we'd make up constellations. One guy swore he saw a wrench in every formation. Zarya chuckled. Sounds like your kind of guy. He was. He died saving my squad. I never got to tell him. Thanks. Zarya looked at him, really looked. You're telling him now. Jack turned away, jaw clenched. Maybe. Silence wrapped around them again, but this time it was warm. The bond between them wasn't forged by romance or need. It was trust. Earned, scarred, shared, and it grew with every passing day aboard the rusting shell of the Vanguard. And for the first time in a long while, neither Zarya nor Jack felt alone. Time moved quietly aboard the Vanguard space station. The days were no longer measured by alarms or routines, but by small, quiet rituals, shared meals, silent stargazing, and the echo of footsteps across steel floors. Jack and Zarya didn't speak of the bond forming between them, but it was there, unmistakable in the way they moved around each other like planets held by the same gravity. Jack had begun preparing breakfast before Zarya or Lira woke. He never said anything about it, but every morning, warm food waited on the table. Nutrient bars softened with rehydrated broth, sometimes paired with a hot cup of recycled caffeine. One morning, Zarya sat at the table watching Jack as he worked on calibrating a diagnostic drone. Lira was still asleep, curled up on the cot behind her. "Are you always this decent?" she asked, sipping her drink. Jack glanced up. "Only before Ordo 800, he said dryly. Zarya gave a quiet laugh. "Must be my lucky hour." There was a silence, easy, not awkward. "I never thought I'd feel okay again," Zarya said softly, setting down her cup. "But something about this place, it's hard to explain. I'm not always looking over my shoulder anymore." Jack set down his tool. "You don't have to explain. I know the feeling." "You do. I spent years in places where silence meant danger, where comfort didn't exist. And now, I'm still surprised when it doesn't hurt to wake up." Zarya looked at him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." Jack gave a faint smirk. "Most people expect a grumpy mechanic who smells like grease and forgets how to make eye contact." "Well, she said you are grumpy. Fair." But the truth was, Jack wasn't just a mechanic to her anymore. And Zarya wasn't just a survivor to him. Evenings on Vanguard became something sacred. After Lira had gone to bed, Jack and Zarya would often sit by the central viewport, silent witnesses to the slow drift of stars beyond. One night as they sat there, Zarya broke the quiet. "I had dreams once," she said. "Before the revolution." Jack turned slightly toward her, saying nothing but listening intently. "I wanted to design ships, not fight with them. My mother taught me the basics of engineering. We used to build toys together. Little wind gliders. She said I had clever hands." Jack nodded. She was right. Zarya smiled faintly, then looked away. "But war takes clever hands and breaks them. Turn them into tools." Jack didn't respond right away. Then softly he said, "War doesn't erase who you are. It just buries it under everything you had to become." She looked back at him. His eyes were distant, but his voice held weight. "Is that what happened to you?" Jack inhaled deeply. "I used to be someone who believed in the cause, in protecting people. But then, I couldn't protect the one person who needed me most." "Your comrade?" she asked gently. He nodded. Zarya didn't press. She knew too well what it meant to carry ghosts. Instead, she reached over and placed her hand over his. Jack blinked. "I don't know what we are," Zarya whispered, "but being here with you, it feels like I don't have to be strong all the time." Jack looked at their hands, hers steady, his scarred. "You don't," he said. "Not with me." The small moments became everything. One day, while fixing a coolant leak in the utility core, Zarya slipped on the slick floor. Jack caught her instinctively, arms wrapped around her waist before she hit the deck. They froze in the moment, close, breathing hard. "You okay?" Jack asked, voice low. Zarya's breath hitched. "Yeah, just clumsy." They didn't move right away. There was no need, no rush. Finally, she pulled away with a small laugh, brushing herself off. "Guess I still need a few more lessons from the expert." Jack smiled. "Lesson 1, don't underestimate cold steel. Lesson 2, always keep your footing. And lesson 3, she asked, raising an eyebrow. He looked at her and without missing a beat said, "Trust the person beside you." She held his gaze, and in that look, something deeper passed between them. Later that week, as the station cycled into its artificial night, Zarya tucked Lira into bed. The girl clutched a small cloth doll Jack had repaired for her earlier that day. Her voice was sleepy and quiet. "Mom," Lira murmured, "Yes, sweetheart. Are we staying here forever?" Zarya paused, brushing a curl from Lira's forehead. "I don't know, but we're safe for now." "Do you like him?" Lira asked suddenly. Zarya blinked. "Who, Jack? I see the way you look at him." Zarya flushed, caught off guard. "What do you mean you smile more when he's around?" Zarya looked away, then kissed her daughter's forehead. "Get some sleep, little spy." Lira giggled softly and closed her eyes. Zarya stood by the door for a moment, then walked back to the observation deck. Jack was already there, watching the stars. "She's asleep?" he asked. Zarya nodded. "She thinks we're staying here forever." Jack exhaled. "Would that be so bad?" Zarya looked at him. "I don't know. It's been a long time since I thought about staying." Jack turned to her. "You're allowed to stop running. Both of you." "And you?" she asked. "Have you stopped running?" He considered that for a long moment. Not yet, he admitted. But I think I'm finally walking in the right direction. Zarya stepped closer. Then maybe we can walk together, she said softly. And for the first time, Jack didn't feel the need to answer with words. He just reached for her hand, and she let him. Time moved quietly aboard the Vanguard space station. The days were no longer measured by alarms or routines, but by small, quiet rituals, shared meals, silent stargazing, and the echo of footsteps across steel floors. Jack and Zarya didn't speak of the bond forming between them, but it was there unmistakable in the way they moved around each other, like planets held by the same gravity. Jack had begun preparing breakfast before Zarya or Lira woke. He never said anything about it, but every morning warm food waited on the table, nutrient bars softened with rehydrated broth, sometimes paired with a hot cup of recycled caffeine. One morning, Zarya sat at the table watching Jack as he worked on calibrating a diagnostic drone. Lira was still asleep, curled up on the cot behind her. "Are you always this decent?" she asked, sipping her drink. Jack glanced up. "Only before you're 800, he said dryly. Zarya gave a quiet laugh. "Must be my lucky hour." There was a silence easy, not awkward. "I never thought I'd feel okay again," Zarya said softly, setting down her cup. "But something about this place, it's hard to explain. I'm not always looking over my shoulder anymore." Jack set down his tool. "You don't have to explain. I know the feeling." "You do. I spent years in places where silence meant danger, where comfort didn't exist. And now, I'm still surprised when it doesn't hurt to wake up." Zarya looked at him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." Jack gave a faint smirk. "Most people expect a grumpy mechanic who smells like grease and forgets how to make eye contact." "Well, she said you are grumpy. Fair." But the truth was, Jack wasn't just a mechanic to her anymore, and Zarya wasn't just a survivor to him. Evenings on Vanguard became something sacred. After Lira had gone to bed, Jack and Zarya would often sit by the central viewport, silent witnesses to the slow drift of stars beyond. One night as they sat there, Zarya broke the quiet. "I had dreams once," she said, "before the revolution." Jack turned slightly toward her, saying nothing but listening intently. "I wanted to design ships, not fight with them. My mother taught me the basics of engineering. We used to build toys together, little wind gliders. She said I had clever hands." Jack nodded. She was right. Zarya smiled faintly, then looked away. "But war takes clever hands and breaks them. Turn them into tools." Jack didn't respond right away. Then softly he said, "War doesn't erase who you are. It just buries it under everything you had to become." She looked back at him. His eyes were distant, but his voice held weight. "Is that what happened to you?" Jack inhaled deeply. "I used to be someone who believed in the cause, in protecting people. But then, I couldn't protect the one person who needed me most." "Your comrade?" she asked gently. He nodded. Zarya didn't press. She knew too well what it meant to carry ghosts. Instead, she reached over and placed her hand over his. Jack blinked. "I don't know what we are," Zarya whispered. "But being here with you, it feels like I don't have to be strong all the time." Jack looked at their hands, hers steady as scarred. "You don't," he said. "Not with me." The small moments became everything. One day, while fixing a coolant leak in the utility core, Zarya slipped on the slick floor. Jack caught her, instinctively, arms wrapped around her waist before she hit the deck. They froze in the moment, close, breathing hard. "You okay, Jack?" asked, voice low. Zarya's breath hitched. "Yeah, just clumsy." They didn't move right away. There was no need, no rush. Finally, she pulled away with a small laugh, brushing herself off. "Guess I still need a few more lessons from the expert." Jack smiled. "Lesson 1, don't underestimate cold steel. Lesson 2, always keep your footing. And lesson 3, she asked, raising an eyebrow. He looked at her and without missing a beat said, "Trust the person beside you." She held his gaze, and in that look, something deeper passed between them. Later that week, as the station cycled into its artificial night, Zarya tucked Lira into bed. The girl clutched a small cloth doll Jack had repaired for her earlier that day. Her voice was sleepy and quiet. "Mom," Lira murmured. "Yes, sweetheart, are we staying here forever?" Zarya paused, brushing a curl from Lira's forehead. "I don't know. but we're safe for now. Do you like him? Lira asked suddenly. Zarya blinked. Who, Jack? I see the way you look at him. Zarya flushed, caught off guard. What do you mean you smile more when he's around? Zarya looked away, then kissed her daughter's forehead. Get some sleep, little spy. Lira giggled softly and closed her eyes. Zarya stood by the door for a moment, then walked back to the observation deck. Jack was already there watching the stars. She's asleep, he asked. Zarya nodded. She thinks we're staying here forever. Jack exhaled. Would that be so bad? Zarya looked at him. I don't know. It's been a long time since I thought about staying. Jack turned to her. You're allowed to stop running. Both of you. And you, she asked. Have you stopped running? He considered that for a long moment. Not yet, he admitted. But I think I'm finally walking in the right direction. Zarya stepped closer. Then maybe we can walk together, she said softly. And for the first time, Jack didn't feel the need to answer with words. He just reached for her hand, and she let him. The station was quiet that evening. Vanguard hummed with its usual mechanical size, recycled air pumping through old ducts, systems humming in the background like a distant heartbeat. Inside the dining bay, the stars bled faint light through the observation window, casting soft illumination across the metal table where Jack and Zarya sat. Lira had fallen asleep in the adjacent room. The door cracked just enough for Zarya to listen for her breathing. It was one of those rare nights where no immediate tasks waited, no systems were screaming for repair, and no shadows loomed at their door. Jack sipped from a cup of warm water. Across from him, Zarya stared into her own silence. He didn't push, but eventually she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Have you ever felt like the entire galaxy forgot who you were? Jack's gaze lifted slowly. Yeah, he said. Too many times. Zarya's eyes didn't leave the rim of her cup. I was someone once. Before all of this. She paused, then let out a shaky breath. I think it's time you knew who I am, or who I used to be. Jack set his cup down. I'm listening. She looked up, her eyes holding something ancient, pain wrapped in strength. I was born on Velethine, she began. You wouldn't have heard of it. It wasn't a big planet. No big cities, no trading hubs. But it was beautiful. Endless green. Lakes so clear you could see to the bottom. That's where I grew up. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had everything that mattered. My mother crafted tools by hand. My father served in the local militia. My sister, Rena, was brilliant, kind, the kind of person everyone wanted to be. Jack nodded slowly, his hands folding together. We were happy, Zarya said, smiling faintly. I used to think it would last forever. She stared at the stars beyond the window. Then the revolution happened. Her voice turned cold. It started slow protests, marches, then bombs. The government had become corrupted. People couldn't survive anymore. My mother believed we needed to fight back. She wasn't wrong, but we lost. Zarya swallowed. Her fingers trembled just slightly. They came for us after the collapse. My sister was captured, accused of treason, just for writing anti-government essays. They executed her. My mother was taken. I don't even know if she survived the prison camps. My father tried to fight them, but we never saw him again after that night. She looked down at the table. I ran. I took Lira and ran. She was just a baby. I remember wrapping her in my sister's old coat. Jack's throat tightened. You were alone, Zarya nodded. For years. From one cold planet to the next. Always hiding. Always moving. I've had to beg, fight, steal. I've seen what the galaxy does to people like me. And what it would do to a child. A silence fell between them, heavy but not empty. Jack finally spoke. And yet here you are. Zarya blinked, startled by the quiet weight in his voice. You survived, he said. Not many could have done that. And you didn't just survive, you protected her. You kept going. Zarya looked away, her eyes glistening. I don't feel strong. I feel like I've been running so long that I don't know how to stop. Maybe you don't have to run anymore, Jack offered. You're not alone now. She studied him for a long moment. Why do you keep saying that? You barely know me? You don't owe me anything. Jack leaned back in his chair, letting out a quiet breath. You're right. I don't. He paused, then added, but I know what it feels like to lose everything and still wake up every day pretending it doesn't hurt. I know what it's like to live with ghosts. Zarya tilted her head slightly. Then tell me. Jack hesitated. My family wasn't broken the way yours was, he said, but I was never close to them. I joined the military to get away and didn't care where they sent me. I thought war would be simple. Orders, missions, completion. His jaw clenched. But it's never simple. You watch people die. You fail to save the ones who needed you most. And every time you close your eyes, they're there waiting. Zarya's voice was soft. Is that what happened to your friend Jack? Nodded slowly. His name was Elias. He wasn't a soldier, just a comms tech. Smart, funny, one of the good ones. When our base was hit, I was the one closest to him. He was bleeding out and He stopped forcing himself to breathe. I froze. Zarya reached out without thinking, placing her hand over his. You didn't kill him, Jack. No, he said bitterly. But I didn't save him either. They sat like that, hands touching pain shared in silence. You know, Zarya whispered, I used to think my past made me unlovable. Too sharp. Too broken. But maybe we're not broken. Just forged. Jack looked at her, and in his eyes she didn't see pity. She saw recognition, understanding. You're not unlovable, he said softly. You're just real. Zarya smiled faintly. Careful, I might start believing that. He let out a quiet laugh. Good. Later, as they walked back toward the living quarters, Lyra's soft breathing filled the hallway. Zarya paused outside her daughter's door. She's the only thing that kept me going, she said. She's lucky to have you, Jack replied. No, Zarya said. I'm the lucky one. She looked up at him. Thank you for listening. Jack nodded. Anytime. Zarya opened the door gently and stepped inside. Jack remained in the corridor alone with the stars, but not as alone as before. He touched the side of the doorway, where her hand had brushed past moments earlier, and for the first time in years he felt like someone had seen him, not as a ghost, not as a failure, but as a man. And deep in his chest, something began to heal. Life on Vanguard had begun to feel possible. Zarya no longer flinched at every hallway creak. Lira laughed more. Jack even caught himself whistling while working on coolant valves. For a while, they all lived inside the illusion that peace could last. But illusions have a way of breaking. It started early one morning, just after the artificial lights had warmed the sleeping quarters into a soft amber glow. Jack sat in the control room, sipping a cup of stale coffee while running standard diagnostics. The screen in front of him pinged once, then again. He frowned, leaned closer. No. The pulse signature was faint, but it was there, moving steadily on the outer sensors. Unidentified, aggressive scan pattern, and familiar in a way that made the hair on his neck stand up. He pulled up the full feed, a bounty hunter ship. Jack's jaw tightened. His fingers moved quickly across the panel, pulling more data. The signature confirmed it, not a random patrol or civilian cruiser. A real predator. The kind of vessel designed to hunt, track, and seize living targets. And it was heading toward Vanguard. Jack stood heart pounding. He tapped the intercom. Zarya. We've got trouble. Zarya rushed into the control room moments later, still fastening her jacket. What is it? Jack pointed to the screen. They found you. Her breath caught. Are you sure? He nodded. Bounty hunter squad. Not just any, these are high tier. Coordinated. Professional. Zarya's face went pale. She leaned over the console, scanning the feed. How the hell did they find us? I don't know. Could have tracked the signal from your escape pod. Maybe they swept the quadrant. Doesn't matter, they're close. A deep silence fell between them. Then from behind a small voice, Mama, they turned. Lira stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Zarya hurried over, dropping to her knees. It's okay, sweetie. Go back to bed. But Lira didn't move. Is it them, the ones who want to take us? Zarya pulled her close, heart aching. No one's taking you, I promise. Jack stared at the sensor feed again. We don't have much time. Zarya stood. We run. Jack turned to her. We fight. She blinked. What they're not going to stop. If we run again, they'll follow. Just like they always have. We hold them off here. This place, it's defensible. Barely. Zarya shook her head. Jack, these aren't thugs. These are trained killers. You and I were not soldiers anymore. I never was, Jack replied. But I've got engineering terrain and stubbornness on my side. You want to gamble our lives on that, I want to stop running. And I think you do too. Zarya looked back at Lira, who stood silently, trying to understand. Jack, Zarya said, voice shaking. If we fail, we won't. She hesitated, then whispered, What do we do? Jack nodded toward the lower decks. We turned Vanguard into a trap. An hour later, the station was alive with motion. Jack moved through the hallways with purpose, welding points, rerouting energy cell, setting explosive charges from scavenged ordnance in the ship's old weapons lockers. Vanguard hadn't been meant for combat anymore, but Jack was inventive. Zarya helped where she could, assisting with wiring dragging crates to block narrow passageways and double-checking Lira's hiding place, a sealed chamber near the oxygen pumps with emergency comms and rations. I want you to stay here no matter what happens, Zarya told her daughter, crouching to eye level. Lira clung to her sleeve. Are you leaving me just for a while? You'll be safe. Jack and we need to make sure they don't hurt anyone else. Tears welled in Lira's eyes. You promised we'd be safe, Zarya swallowed. We still are. But sometimes to protect the ones we love, we have to stand and fight. Jack appeared in the doorway. Ready, Zarya hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, I love you, always. Then she rose and followed Jack into the dark. They took up positions near the core corridor, the only straight line from the docking bay into the station's heart. Jack crouched behind a shielded panel, one hand on the trigger for the improvised charges. Zarya stood across from him, armed with a blaster rifle salvaged from the old weapons cabinet. Have you ever used one of those? Jack asked, adjusting the sight on his own. Once, she replied, before everything fell apart. You don't have to be perfect, he said. Just stay alive. Zarya gave a grim smile. That I can do. They heard it then, a metallic thud from the docking bay. Then another. The bounty hunters had arrived. Jack looked at Zarya. Here we go. The corridor lights flickered. Shadows moved. Then the first hunter appeared, massive, armored, faceless. Behind him, two more. Zarya's pulse spiked. The lead bounty hunter raised his rifle and began to advance. Jack waited, then pressed the detonator. A thunderous blast rocked the corridor. Smoke, screaming metal. The first two hunters were thrown backward. Go, Jack shouted. Zarya opened fire, her blast, striking one of the flanking enemies. He collapsed, twitching. The last hunter rolled behind a panel and returned fire, searing blue bolts that struck the walls just inches from Jack's head. They ducked, moved, reloaded. The battle raged for minutes that felt like hours. Zarya's shoulder was grazed by a shot. Jack's side was bruised from diving out of the way of a collapsing bulkhead. But they held. They fought like people with nothing left to lose because they had already lost too much. And now they were fighting to keep what little remained. Family, hope, each other. By the time the last bounty hunter lay unmoving on the cold floor, silence returned to Vanguard. Jack leaned against a wall chest, heaving. Blood stained the fabric near his ribs. Zarya limped forward, shoulder-scorched hair plastered to her face with sweat. We did it, she breathed. Jack nodded, barely able to stand. For now. Zarya looked around at the ruined corridor. Then at him. You stayed, she whispered. So did you. She stepped closer, and in the aftermath of violence, where breath replaced bullets and silence swallowed fear, they stood together, two survivors, broken but unyielding. Not alone. Never again. The battle was over, but its weight remained. The metallic scent of scorched wiring and blood hung heavy in the air. Sparks flickered from ruptured panels, casting brief flashes of light across the scorched walls of Vanguard's main corridor. Jack leaned against a cracked bulkhead, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping through his fingers. His face was pale, jaw clenched against the pain. Zarya was by his side, helping lower him to the ground. Sit still, she murmured. Let me see it. I'm fine, Jack muttered, though his body trembled. You're bleeding through your shirt. That's not fine. Her voice was sharper than usual, not from anger, but fear. She peeled back the fabric and winced. The gash on his side was deep and still bleeding. Not fatal. Yet. But it would be if they didn't act fast. I've seen worse, Jack said through gritted teeth. Zarya glared at him. And how many of those times did you die? He chuckled weakly, then winced. Touché. But even as she worked to apply pressure and seal the wound, Jack's eyes stayed on the corridor. The silence felt wrong. They were just a scout team, he said quietly. A forward unit. There'll be more. Zarya looked up sharply. You think they called for reinforcements? I'd bet my other lung on it. She exhaled slowly, the gravity of his words sinking in. How long, she asked. Maybe an hour, Jack replied. Maybe less. They both knew the truth. Vanguard couldn't hold another wave. The traps were used. The systems were damaged. Jack himself could barely stand. Zarya had a shoulder wound that still burned with every breath. And Lira, she was just a child. Zarya swallowed the fear in her throat. We need to go. Jack didn't respond. She turned to him, voice firm. Jack, we take Lira. We leave. No. Zarya froze. What? He looked up at her, eyes steady. You take Lira. You leave. No. Her voice cracked. Zarya, listen to me. No. She stood abruptly, fists clenched. Don't you dare. Jack didn't flinch. They're tracking the station. As long as it's warm, they'll keep coming. Someone needs to stay behind, keep it powered. Make it look like you're still here. There has to be another way. There isn't. She shook her head violently. I won't let you die here. Jack reached out, his bloodied hand brushing her fingers. You won't be letting me. I'm choosing this. You think that makes it easier, Zarya whispered, her voice cracking. No, he said, but it makes it worth something. They stood in silence. Zarya's eyes burned with unshed tears, her chest tight with a pain she didn't want to name. I already lost everyone, she said. My family, my home. I can't lose you too. Jack gave a faint smile. You won't. Not really. Zarya looked away. Don't talk like that. He leaned forward, groaning, and reached for her hand again. I don't have much left, Zarya. But what I do have, I want to use to give you both a chance. She knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. You don't have to do this alone. He looked at her, and for a moment the Jack she'd known, quiet, steady, deeply human, shone through. I'm not alone, he said softly. Not anymore. Later in the equipment bay, Zarya packed what little she could carry: food, medical supplies, a spare plasma pistol. Lira sat quietly nearby, hugging her doll. Is Jack coming? She asked. Zarya hesitated. No, sweetheart. Not this time. Why not? Zarya crouched beside her, pulling the child into her arms. Because he's going to make sure we stay safe, even if it means he can't come with us. Lira's face crumpled. But I don't want to leave him. I know, Zarya whispered. I don't either. Jack appeared in the doorway, his stance unsteady but resolved. Are you ready? He asked. Zarya nodded, but she didn't meet his eyes. He knelt beside Lira, ruffling her hair. Hey, kiddo. You're going to have to be strong now, all right? Lira clutched his sleeve. I don't want to be brave anymore. Jack smiled. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are. Tears welled in the girl's eyes. Will I see you again? Jack looked up at Zarya, then back down. I hope so. She hugged him tightly and he held her as best he could, even through the pain. When he let go, he turned to Zarya, face unreadable. I rigged the core. Once you're clear, I'll draw the next ship in and overload the power matrix. They won't get anything but scrap. Zarya stared at him. And I'll stay long enough to finish it. She reached up, cradling the side of his face. This isn't goodbye. No, Jack whispered. Just until. Their lips met, soft, desperate, honest. Not a promise. Just a recognition of everything they'd shared and everything that would remain even in separation. When they pulled apart, Zarya's voice was steel. You come back. Jack gave the smallest nod. If there's a way. She turned, gripping Lira's hand, and walked toward the emergency escape pod bay. Jack watched them go, his heart thudding, not from fear, but from love. The good kind. The kind worth dying for. He returned to the core chamber, blood seeping through his patched shirt steps, slow and deliberate. He sat before the central console and began rerouting power, manually overriding the failsafes he'd designed years ago. A proximity alert blared. The next hunter ship was arriving. Jack smiled to himself. Let's finish this. He looked toward the stars through the reinforced window. Be safe, Zarya. Take care of her. His hands moved steadily over the console as the final sequence initialized. For the first time in years, Jack Wren didn't feel alone. And for the first time ever, he felt at peace. The cold air inside Vanguard was thick with smoke and heat. Emergency lights cast flickering shadows along the bulkheads, creating the illusion of movement phantoms dancing where real danger approached. Jack stood near the command terminal, bleeding from his side, one hand braced against the console for balance. He could feel the power core humming beneath his boots, heating up far faster than it should. The overload sequence was running just as he'd planned. Above him, the station's sensors blared another warning. Dock breach imminent. They were here. The second hunter ship had arrived. He took a shaky breath and whispered, "All right, you bastards. Let's dance." Outside the station, the sleek vessel latched onto the hull with magnetic clamps. Within moments, cutting torches lit the docking corridor, sending sparks raining down like artificial starlight. Inside, Jack limped toward the blast door and locked it down with a manual override. His fingers trembled over the control panel. This door would hold for maybe 3 minutes 5 if the hunters were stupid. They never were. His comm unit crackled. He tapped it weakly, expecting silence. But then Jack's Zarya voice. He froze. "Zarya. What the hell? How are you?" "We didn't go." Jack's eyes widened. "What you thought we'd just run. Leave you here to die alone. Not happening. I gave you an order." He growled, pain sharpening his voice. "I'm not one of your soldiers," she shot back. "You don't get to choose who fights for you." There was silence for a long beat. Then Jack muttered, "You stubborn, I learned from the best." He exhaled sharply, not sure whether to scream or laugh. "Zarya, the overload is active. You can't be here." "I know. That's why we're going to help finish this faster." At that moment, the outer hull shuddered. The breach was nearly complete. Zarya's voice came again. "We're in position near the secondary corridor. We'll draw them there. You trigger the core when we give the signal." Jack clenched his jaw. "If they get to you first, they won't." Jack looked toward the corridor again, then closed his eyes. "Fine. But if you get yourself killed, You'll," what she asked, teasing. "Haunt me." He huffed a dry laugh. "Something like that." In the dim hallway near the secondary bulkhead, Zarya crouched behind a half-collapsed wall. Lira was safely tucked into the nearby comms room, hidden behind emergency plating, armed with a small shock device Jack had rigged earlier. Zarya loaded her blaster jaw tight. She looked at the approaching shadow, one of the new hunters, taller and bulkier than the last wave, moving with predatory grace. "Come on," she muttered. "Come see what a desperate mother looks like." The hunter advanced. Zarya opened fire. The shots rang out, catching the armored target square in the chest. It stumbled but didn't fall. It raised its weapon and returned fire, sizzling bolts of plasma scorching the wall above her head. She ducked, rolled behind a support beam, then shouted into her comm. Now Jack slammed his hand on the console. "Core breach initiated. 10 seconds. His voice dropped as he watched the system tick down. 9, 8. The bounty hunters had been lured into the station's central artery, exactly where they were supposed to be. 5, 4. His vision blurred. The blood loss was taking its toll. He sagged against the panel. "Zarya?" he whispered, hoping she could still hear. "We're out," she responded, breathless but alive. "Do it. 3, 2. Jack hesitated. One last time he looked at the viewport. He saw the stars and smiled. Detonation. The explosion ripped through Vanguard's interior with a thunderous roar. Fire and debris surged through the corridors, consuming everything in its path. The overload ignited the central reactor and turned the station's heart into a blazing inferno. The bounty hunter squad was incinerated in a heartbeat. Outside, the emergency escape pod carrying Zarya and Lira was propelled backward by the shockwave. Zarya shielded her daughter with her body as the pod rattled violently through the vacuum. Then silence. Only stars remained. Moments later, the emergency lights inside the pod blinked weakly. The walls creaked, systems struggling to stabilize. Zarya groaned, lifting herself from the floor. Her shoulder burned, her legs ached, but she was alive. And so was Lira. The girl was shaken but conscious. "Mama," she asked, voice trembling. Zarya pulled her close. I'm here. I've got you. They lay there in silence for a while, the only sound being their breaths and the distant hum of the pod's failing systems. Then Lira asked the question Zarya had been dreading. Where's Jack? Zarya didn't answer right away. She looked through the tiny viewport where the shattered remains of Vanguard drifted like ashes in the dark. He stayed behind, she finally whispered. Why to save us? Lira pressed her forehead to her mother's chest. I miss him already. Zarya closed her eyes, pressing a kiss to Lira's hair. So do I. But in her heart she felt something else too, beyond the pain, beyond the loss. Pride. Jack had given them something no one else ever had. A second chance. Hours later, the emergency beacon activated. A passing freighter picking up the distress signal veered toward the pod. Inside, Zarya held Lira close, watching the stars shift as the ship approached. And though her body was broken, her spirit was not. Jack Wren was gone, but his sacrifice had lit a path through the darkness, and they would walk it, together. Silence returned to space. The Vanguard station was gone, reduced to drifting fragments and scorched debris, its final heartbeat, a blast that shook the stars. But inside the emergency pod, hurtling through that cold black void, life clung tightly to the fragile metal shell. Zarya cradled Jack's coat in her lap, torn and scorched at the edges. It was all that was left of him. Her fingers trembled as they ran over the worn fabric. She had refused to let it go when they fled. A part of her had known, if not consciously then, somewhere deep, that she wouldn't see him again. Lira sat beside her, silent head resting on her mother's arm. Her small fingers held tightly to the cloth doll Jack had repaired. The child hadn't spoken since the blast. Zarya finally broke the silence. He saved us. Lira didn't move. But he's not here. Zarya swallowed. No, but he gave everything so you could be. The emergency pod groaned as its systems struggled to stabilize. Red lights blinked above, and a soft voice repeated, power critical. Life support at 60%. Zarya pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly, then moved to the console. She worked fast, rerouting power, shutting down non-essentials. Jack had taught her well. As she sealed a coolant leak and reconnected a vital pressure valve, her hands stung with the effort. Her shoulder throbbed with every motion, but she refused to stop. You okay? Mama Lira asked quietly. Zarya glanced back at her. I will be. Another flicker on the screen. A beacon. Zarya's breath caught. Someone's close. She adjusted the long-range comms, amplifying the emergency broadcast. The console blinked again. Contact. Incoming vessel. Relief crashed over her, heavy and dangerous. It made her knees buckle. Not yet. She couldn't fall apart yet. The pod lurched slightly, the docking clamps of the approaching freighter engaging. Zarya grabbed the handrail to keep steady, then turned to Lira. We're going to be okay. The girl looked up with wide, tired eyes. Promise. Zarya knelt and cupped her daughter's cheek. With everything I have left. The freighter was an old mining hauler, rusted but functional. Its crew, a mix of traders and scavengers, stared in shock when the pod doors opened. Zarya emerged, first blood on her clothes, her eyes hard and clear. Lira followed, clutching her hand. A bearded man stepped forward. We picked up your signal. You were at that station, Zarya nodded. Not anymore. The man looked her over. Where's the rest of your crew? She didn't flinch. There is no crew. His eyes dropped to the child. You two alone. Zarya hesitated. There were 3 of us. The silence said everything else. They were ushered aboard. Medics tended to Zarya's wounds, wrapped her shoulder, gave Lira clean clothes and food. But nothing they could offer dulled the hollowness that had taken root inside her. As the ship continued toward the next starport, Zarya sat by the viewing window, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the glass. A quiet cough broke her thoughts. Lira. She stood beside her mother, something clutched in her hand. Zarya looked down. It was the comms unit from the pod, scorched and cracked, but miraculously intact. Jack's voice logs were still stored inside. Zarya took it slowly, hands trembling. Do you want to hear him again? Lira asked. Zarya stared at the device for a long moment. Then she pressed play. Jack's voice emerged, warbled but clear. System log. This is Jack Wren. Final entry. If anyone's listening to this, know that I didn't die alone. I made a choice, and it was the right one. Zarya's chest tightened. There's a little girl out there. Her name is Lira. She's going to change things one day, I'm sure of it. Just like her mother already has. Zarya, if this ever reaches you, I want you to know I didn't stay behind out of duty or guilt. I stayed because I believed in something again. In someone. You gave me that. The recording ended. Zarya pressed the comm to her chest, eyes closed. A tear slid down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. The days aboard the freighter blurred, but healing in its own quiet way began. Zarya helped in the ship's engine room, fixing conduits and optimizing cooling cycles. The crew learned quickly not to underestimate her. She was quiet but steady, capable. Every now and then, someone would ask what she was running from. She never answered. Lira grew brighter. Her laughter returned. She played with the ship cat, sketched imaginary ships in her datapad, and told stories about her friend Jack, who could fix anything. One evening, as the freighter passed through a dense star field, Zarya sat alone looking out. The stars had always frightened her, too many places to hide, too many places to run. But now she looked at them differently. Somewhere in that vast silence, Jack Wren had burned a path of light through the darkness, and she would carry it, not as a ghost, but as a flame. When the freighter docked at a small neutral colony on the edge of settled space, Zarya and Lira disembarked. They had no destination, no identity papers, and no real plan. But they had each other. They found lodging in a quiet outpost near the colony's power plant. Zarya offered to work for scraps and housing, no questions asked. Within weeks, she had rewired half the colony's outdated systems and repaired the hydroponics regulators. People started to nod when she passed. Someone even smiled. Lira made friends. One night after dinner, she looked up at her mother. Mama, do you think Jack would be proud of us? Zarya touched the comm unit, still stored safely in her coat. I don't think, she whispered. I know. Time, Zarya discovered, didn't heal wounds. It just layered them with routine. The days in the colony passed in a steady rhythm, repair requests from the energy grid, occasional troubleshooting on water filters, a barter here, a favor there. The people were kind enough if distant. They knew she was hiding something, but in places like this, privacy was part of the culture. For the first time in years, no one was chasing her, and it left her with too much time to think. She sat at the edge of the outpost's dry garden one evening, legs folded beneath her fingers, absently rubbing at the old tear in Jack's coat sleeve. Lira was playing nearby, her laughter mingling with the soft hum of wind turbines. A quiet footstep approached behind her. Zarya didn't look. You're the new mechanic. The voice was male, calm, older but not frail. I am, she replied. I've seen your work on the East Pump Station. Smart reroute. She turned to glance at the speaker. He was tall with streaks of gray in his hair, a utility belt slung low over his hip. I do what I can, Zarya said. He sat beside her. Not close, just near enough to be heard. I'm Rion, he said. I used to run freight for the Alliance before everything turned to ash. She gave a faint nod. Zarya, just Zarya, just Zarya. A long pause stretched between them. He nodded toward the child playing with a stick and a metal lid. Your girl, my daughter, she said quietly. She's tough. She didn't get that from me. Rion gave a small chuckle. I doubt that. Zarya didn't respond. The silence was familiar, but it wasn't empty. It was watching. You lost someone, Rion said after a moment. I see it in your eyes. She flinched. Not visibly, just enough to feel it in her chest. We all lose someone eventually, she murmured. Yeah, Rion replied, but some of us lose people who made us believe again. Those are the hardest. She glanced at him, then eyes sharp. What are you trying to say? Nothing, he said, lifting a hand in peace. Just, you're not the only one walking around with ghosts. Zarya looked back toward Lira, who was now humming to herself. He wasn't supposed to be important, she whispered. He was just a man fixing things, a quiet presence. But somehow he came home, Rion finished for her. She didn't answer. Rion stood. If you ever need spare parts or someone to help carry a fusion cell, I work the grid house. Zarya nodded once. As he turned to leave, he paused. You can keep running from pain, or you can start building something around it. Either way, you'll carry it. She watched him disappear into the shadows beyond the turbine field, and for the first time in weeks, she wondered if she even remembered how to build anything that didn't break. Later that night, Zarya sat at the edge of Lira's small cot, watching her daughter sleep. The girl had grown thinner but stronger. Her features had changed, less round, more determined. She had her father's quiet stubbornness, though she'd never met the man. She stirred in her sleep. Mama Zarya brushed hair from her forehead. "I'm here." Lira opened her eyes slightly. "Did he hurt?" Zarya froze. "Who, Jack?" Lira whispered. "Did it hurt when he stayed behind?" Zarya's voice caught. "I think it did." "Why did he do it?" Zarya took a deep breath. "Because he wanted you to live, to grow up free, and because he loved us." Lira curled into her mother's side. "Do you still think about him?" Zarya held her close. "Every time I close my eyes." Lira didn't answer. She just held her tighter. And in the stillness of that room, surrounded by cracked walls and the low hum of an overworked generator, Zarya felt something shift. Not in her bones, not in her wounds, but in her heart. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was remembering how to love again. Days later, she passed Rion near the power station. He offered a small nod. She nodded back. They said nothing, but the next morning a fresh box of capacitors appeared outside her door. Later that week, she left half a loaf of her homemade ration bread on his bench. Neither said thank you. Neither needed to. Zarya sat on the roof of the comms shed that night, eyes turned skyward. The stars had returned. After the dust storms cleared, after the tension of being hunted faded, she could finally see them again. There was a quiet in her that hadn't been there before. It wasn't peace, but it was the shape peace might take given time. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered into the night, "Wherever you are, Jack, we're okay." Then she turned, climbed back down, and went to tuck Lira in. The stars could wait. She had a future to build. Rain was rare in the colony world. It came not in gentle drizzles, but in sudden, silvery sheets, stinging, cleansing alive. Zarya stood beneath the overhang of the supply depot, her arms crossed, watching the downpour, as if it were an old friend arriving late. The air smelled of ozone and fresh soil. The dust of the turbines had been washed away, and for once the colony shimmered under a new kind of light. Behind her, the door creaked open. Lira peeked out. "Mama, you're going to get wet." Zarya turned slightly, a smile tugging at her lips. "I don't mind." Lira hesitated, then padded out barefoot, clutching her drawing pad to her chest. She stepped beside her mother and looked out at the rain. "Jack liked the rain," she said. Zarya blinked. "You remember that?" Lira nodded. "He said the rain on old Earth used to smell like electricity and grass." Zarya chuckled. "That sounds like something he'd say." They stood there watching as the lightning flickered in the distance. Lira opened her pad and showed her the page. It was a sketch of Vanguard station, crude but recognizable. 3 stick figures stood at the center, one tall, one medium, one small. Jack, Zarya, Lira. Zarya's breath caught. "You drew this. I wanted to remember what it felt like," Lira whispered, before he stayed behind. Zarya knelt, drawing the girl into a hug. "We carry him, don't we?" Lira nodded into her mother's shoulder. "All the time." That evening, Zarya lit the old comm unit for the first time in weeks. Its screen glowed faintly, the audio log still intact. She hesitated, then selected a file marked simply, "Last Repair." Jack's voice came through, steady and soft. "It's strange fixing something that's about to break anyway. You'd think it'd feel pointless, but somehow it doesn't. Maybe it's about dignity, or maybe it's about love." Zarya leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edges of the device. "There's a beauty to broken things trying again, to wiring that still sparks, to people who still care. Zarya, if you ever hear this, know that every moment I spent fixing this place was worth it because of you." She pressed pause, unable to hear more. Tears welled in her eyes, not from grief this time, but from something gentler. Memory. She didn't want to forget the sound of his voice. The next day, she visited the storage crates behind the turbine housing, junked equipment, old components, scrap wiring. And there, half buried beneath a tarp, she found something she hadn't expected, a partial frame. Damaged. Ancient. A Vanguard drone, one of Jack's. "Thought this had been stripped," she muttered. She pulled it free, wiped off the dust, and stared at the scorch marks along its side. It had survived the destruction, somehow. With effort, she dragged it back to the workshop. All day and into the night, she worked in silence, welding, realigning, reconnecting memory cores. She was no Jack Wren, but his teaching had lingered like fingerprints in her hands. Lira came to watch curious. "What are you doing?" Zarya glanced at her. "Fixing a memory." By morning it stood upright barely. The drone's eyes flickered. Its internal speaker crackled. The voice that emerged wasn't quite Jack's, but the intonation was close enough to make her heart stop. "System online. Identifier J unit. Greetings, Zarya." She stepped back, staring. Jack voice pattern simulated, based on prior logs. "Is this acceptable?" Zarya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "It's perfect." The drone blinked. "The memory core is fragmented. However, I retained fragments of him. Would you like to hear?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Yes." A burst of static. Then Zarya, "If you're fixing this, then maybe you're still surviving. And that means something. It means I didn't die for nothing. You were the first person to look at me like I wasn't broken. That mattered. Tell Lira. She was the best part of my last days. The part that made me smile even when everything hurt." Zarya closed her eyes. The pain didn't vanish, but it changed shape, like a stone smoothed by time and water. When she opened them again, she looked at the drone and smiled faintly. "You're still helping," she whispered. "Affirmative," the drone replied. In the following weeks, she kept rebuilding. Not just machines, but connections. She began tutoring the colony's children in basic engineering, helped older workers recalibrate power cells, rewired the med bay so it no longer shorted during storms. And people began to come not just for repairs, but for her. She was no longer just an outsider. She was Zarya, the one who fixed things. One night as she sat near the garden, Rian joined her again. He watched the stars with her for a while before speaking. "You seem lighter." She glanced at him. "I remembered something." He raised an eyebrow. "What it's like," she said softly, "to stop surviving and start living." He gave a gentle nod. "About time." Zarya leaned back, eyes scanning the constellations. "Jack once told me the stars aren't cold. Just quiet, like they're waiting for someone to listen." Rian smirked. "Then maybe we ought to start listening more." She chuckled, and for the first time in a long time, she felt not only whole, but home. It began with a flicker. Just after dusk, the colony's comm tower lit up with an incoming signal. Nothing unusual, traders, drifters, and occasional distress call, but this one came with an old code. A military-encoded frequency no one had used in years. Zarya stood in the generator hall when the alert sounded. Rian jogged in holding a tablet. "You might want to see this." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "What is it?" He handed it over. Encrypted message. Bounced through 4 satellites before it found us. "Code matches something I haven't seen since before Vanguard fell." Zarya's fingers hovered over the screen. Then she tapped decrypt. Lines of static resolved into words. A single message. Short, raw. "Zarya. If you're alive, meet me. Outpost 17C, Northern Wastes. Come alone. Ja." Her breath hitched. JW, Jack Wren. She stared at the letters as if the universe itself had played a cruel joke. She had buried him, burned him in the stars, mourned him in silence. But there it was. A whisper from the grave. Zarya Rayan asked quietly. "You okay?" She looked up. "I need transport." The trip to Outpost 17C was treacherous. The northern wastes were rarely traversed, choked with ice, and rock winds screaming like ancient ghosts. Zarya rode alone in an old hover skiff bundled in her coat, Lira's drawing pad pressed to her chest beneath her armor. She hadn't told her daughter the truth. Not yet. Not until she was sure. The outpost came into view like a dream half buried in snow, its beacon pulsing weakly. A relic from the war. Broken. Forgotten. She stepped off the skiff and approached the airlock. It opened with a hiss, the stale scent of recycled air greeting her like an old wound. Inside, nothing moved. "Jack," she called. No answer. She crept forward past twisted metal and old ration crates. A light flickered near the back of the station, and then she heard it. Footsteps. She spun, weapon drawn, heart pounding in her ears. And there he was, older, scarred, thin, but unmistakably alive. Jack Wren. Her knees nearly gave out. "You're dead," she whispered. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. Just nodded once. "I thought I was too." She stepped closer, eyes wide. "How?" He lowered his hood, revealing a jagged burn along his jawline. "One of the lower decks didn't collapse. The blast threw me clear of the core, knocked me out cold. When I woke up, the station was gone, and so were you." Zarya took another step. "Why didn't you find me sooner? I tried," he said quietly. "I was picked up by a scavenger crew who thought I was dead weight. Took me months to escape, then longer to trace the signal from the escape pod." "You found us," she said, voice shaking. "I never stopped looking." The silence that followed held lifetimes. Then she stepped forward and hit him. Hard. Jack staggered back. "Ow. Okay. I probably deserved that." "You think she snapped? You left us. You told me to run. I thought I lost you." "I thought I lost you," he growled back. "I gave up everything to make sure you made it out alive. I didn't plan to wake up." She stared at him, furious and aching all at once. "You idiot!" He stepped closer. "I know." And then finally she embraced him. His arms came around her slowly, like he was afraid she might vanish again. She buried her face in his shoulder, breathing him in. Not a memory, not a recording. Real. Alive. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she whispered. "Neither did I," he murmured. "But here we are." They sat for hours beside the old outpost heater, trading stories filling in the lost time. Jack had survived by scavenging, hiding, fighting. Zarya had rebuilt her world one broken circuit at a time. "You've changed," he said. "So have you." He nodded. "I saw what you built. The colony, the people." "Lira." Zarya tensed. "She doesn't know," Jack guessed. "I couldn't tell her," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't want to give her false hope." Jack exhaled. "Then let's not wait any longer." They returned together. As the skiff pulled into the colony, Zarya's hands trembled on the controls. Jack stood beside her, quiet, nervous. He hadn't seen Lira in over a year. The girl who had once sat on his shoulders and asked questions about wires and stars was now older, sharper-eyed. She was waiting near the workshop, a tool belt slung around her waist. When she saw them, her eyes narrowed. "Who's that?" she asked. Zarya took a breath. "Come here, sweetheart." Lira approached cautiously, gaze fixed on the man beside her mother. "Lira," Zarya said softly, "this is someone you used to know. Someone who never stopped trying to find us." Jack crouched down, meeting her eye level. "Hey, kiddo." Lira stared, her lip covered. Then suddenly she ran, straight into his arms. "You're back," she cried. "You're really back." Jack held her tight, voice thick. "I missed you, troublemaker." She pulled back just enough to punch him in the shoulder. "You said you'd stay." "I tried," he said, grinning. "I really did." Zarya watched them, tears in her eyes. And this time they were from joy. The past had returned not as a ghost, but as a second chance, and she intended to hold it tightly. The colony felt different now. Not because anything physical had changed. The wind still howled across the dusty ridgelines. The turbines still creaked under the load. But because the weight that had hung over Zarya's soul had shifted. She was no longer watching the horizon with fear. She was watching it with purpose. Jack had returned. Not as the ghost she clung to, but as a man scarred, stubborn, and still building something from the wreckage. And Lira had bloomed. Her laughter was louder, her steps quicker. She began asking Jack questions again about engines, power coils, old Earth. She told him all the things he'd missed, how the cat always stole socks, how Zarya's bread was too dry on Thursdays, how she'd fix the solar regulator with only duct tape and a curse word. Zarya would catch Jack watching their daughter with a look that said, "Thank you for raising her when I couldn't." He never said it aloud. He didn't need to. At night, they sat on the rooftop of the workshop, Zarya, Jack, and Lira, between them wrapped in one too large blanket, watching the stars. The drone Zarya had rebuilt J-Unit buzzed nearby, its optics, scanning the constellations. "You think it remembers more than it says?" Lira asked one evening. Jack smirked. "It's possible. I coded it to keep secrets, especially birthday presents." Lira grinned. "Then I'm totally hacking it next week." Zarya laughed softly. It wasn't the brittle sound she used to make when surviving. This one was warm open, alive. Jack turned to her. You ever think we'd make it this far? She tilted her head. Honestly, no. He leaned back, hands behind his head. You carried everything. I just stalled the end for a few minutes. She looked at him. You gave us time, she said. The time we used to live in. His smile faded into something quieter. I missed everything, Zarya. You didn't miss her, Zarya said, nodding toward Lira. Not really. You're here now. She remembers you. That's enough. Jack's throat worked for a second before he gave a small nod. Still, he said, glancing up. I owe you both more than I can say. You don't have to say anything, Zarya replied. Just stay. The following weeks brought change. Jack threw himself into the colony's systems, helping reroute emergency circuits, overhauling the water purification units, and even teaching a few of the local teens how to solder without burning off their eyebrows. The people remembered him as the man who once stayed behind. They welcomed him as someone who came back. He was no hero, but he was a builder, and the colony needed builders more than anything. Zarya found herself walking lighter. Her back didn't ache as much. Her hands still worked like steel, but her voice softened. She even started carving again, small things mostly. A bird, a circuit flower, a piece of drift metal shaped like a star. One night as she sat carving under the light of the generator's shed, Jack came beside her. Still working with scraps, huh? She smirked, still making beauty from broken things. He watched her for a moment. You know I meant what I said. Back on Vanguard, you changed me. Zarya paused in her carving. I didn't try to, she said. I know. That's what made it real. They sat in silence, comfortable and full. Then Jack added, I'm thinking of rebuilding the Eastern Relay Station. Alone. Well, maybe with some help. Zarya gave him a sidelong glance. You asking me on a date, Wren? He grinned. Only if the repair kit counts as flowers. She rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered long after he walked away. On the eve of the solar alignment, the colony gathered for a celebration, an old custom revived by Lira, who had declared they needed a day for not just surviving. Lanterns were strung across the main square. Laughter rang out, and someone even brought out a salvaged music player. Zarya stood at the edge, watching the people she once tried to avoid. Now they waved at her. She waved back. Jack appeared beside her, a small metal charm in his hand. What's this? She asked. He placed it in her palm. A tiny bird carved from scrap. One wing singed. One eye is missing. It's us, he said. Not perfect, but it's still flying. Zarya looked at him, heart full, and for the first time in a long, long time, she allowed herself to believe in something beyond pain. A future, rebuilt not with grand gestures, but with steady hands, quiet love, and the promise of one more day. Later, as the stars blinked overhead and the colony dimmed for the night, Lira whispered as she fell asleep, We're not broken anymore, are we? Zarya kissed her forehead. No, sweetheart, she whispered back. We're just unfinished. This was never a story about war. Not really. It was about what happens after the quiet wreckage left behind, when the gunfire stops, when stations fall, and lovers are presumed lost. Zarya's story isn't one of revenge or conquest, but of survival, memory, and the fragile courage to hope again when all reason tells you not to. She was never meant to be a hero. Just a mother running through frozen wastelands, carrying her daughter, and the ghosts of a man who gave everything so they could live. But sometimes that's where real strength lies, not in the fight, but in the act of choosing to build again, with trembling hands and a shattered heart. Jack's unexpected return was not a miracle that erased the past. It was a second chance wrapped in scars. It forced them both to confront who they had become in the other's absence, and whether love could survive the silence between them. And for Lira, it was the quiet healing of knowing she was not forgotten. The colony itself becomes a symbol, an echo of humanity's greater resilience. A place where exiles, mechanics, and war orphans come together not to erase the pain, but to transform it. With every wire Zarya fixed, every drone Jack rebuilt, every question Lira asked, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were reclaiming their lives. And in the end, as stars blinked over metal rooftops and lanterns danced in dusty wind, the message became clear. We are not just the sum of what we've lost. We are what we choose to protect, to remember, and to love, even in the aftermath. Because sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is choosing to begin again.